The text message arrived exactly at 8:30 in the evening, reading that only important people were allowed inside. They forgot that the most important person is the one holding the keys to every single contract. I looked at the $500,000 wedding plans spread across my table and opened my old file box. A truth more expensive than their ceremony was about to come out. My name is Marianne Caldwell. I am 58 years old, of stubborn Irish-Scottish descent, and for the last 27 years, I have worked as the internal auditor at Harbourline Compliance Group. My colleagues often say I keep records like I keep my breath essential for survival. I do not lose receipts, I do not misplace contracts, and I certainly do not forget the feeling of being insulted in the hallway of a house I helped pay for. I stood on the porch of the townhouse in Raleigh, North Carolina, shielding a warm pecan pie with my body against the grey drizzle. In my purse sat a small velvet box containing my mother's gold necklace, a piece intended to be something old for the bride. I had driven 2 hours to get here early, my heart full of that nervous, heavy love that mothers carry when their only child is about to leave them for good. The door opened. Sydney stood there, her phone pressed tight to her ear. She did not hug me. She did not smile. She looked at the pie in my hands as if I were holding a bag of wet trash she now had to dispose of. No. The brand deal specifies organic silk, Sydney said into the phone, turning her back to me before I even stepped across the threshold. If the backdrop isn't consistent with the concept, we lose the sponsorship. I walked in, closing the door behind me. The air inside smelled of expensive candles and high-stakes stress. Sydney, I said, stepping forward. I brought the pecan pie you used to like, and I have something for... Mom, please, she hissed, covering the microphone with a manicured hand. I am on a very important call. Can you just put that down? Then Grant Halford walked in. He wore a suit that likely cost more than my first car, his smile plastered on like a decal. He did not look at me. He looked through me. Marianne, he said, nodding once. You are early? I thought I could help with the rehearsal dinner preparations, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It is tradition. Grant chuckled, a dry sound that had absolutely no humour in it. He walked over to Sydney and placed a hand on her shoulder, claiming her, shielding her from the inconvenience of her own mother. About that, Grant said. Tonight is the rehearsal dinner. It is a high-stakes environment. We have potential investors and key stakeholders coming. To be frank, we need the room to be exclusively for the people who make things happen. I gripped the pie box tighter, feeling the cardboard buckle slightly. Make things happen. I am the mother of the bride. It is complicated, Grant said, his eyes cold and unblinking. Tonight, only important people are allowed inside. You surely understand? I looked at my daughter. I waited for her to laugh, to tell him he was being ridiculous. I waited for the girl I raised on a widow's salary to defend me. Sydney finally lowered her phone. She did not look me in the eye. Mom, don't make everything so hard, she said, her voice flat and exhausted. Grant is right. It is a networking opportunity as much as a dinner. You would just be bored. Just go to your hotel. Come tomorrow for the ceremony. On time. The silence that followed was heavy. The tradition of the night before the wedding. The intimacy of family, it was gone. I realized then that I wasn't family to them. I was being categorized somewhere between the florist and the catering staff, but with less utility. I see, I said. My voice was calm. The voice I used when finding a discrepancy in a ledger that someone thought they had hidden. I will just put this in the kitchen. I walked past them into the open-plan kitchen. The counters were covered in paperwork. I set the pie down on the granite island, right next to a thick stack of documents titled Run of Show. I glanced down. It was a production schedule, listing VIPs, influencers, and media partners. Near the bottom, in small print, was a note, sponsor approvals pending final payment tonight. That was when I saw the envelope. It was sitting on top of the toaster, half open. The label read, Wire Instructions, Final 180,000. It was addressed to a recipient I had never heard of. But what stopped my heart wasn't the number. It was the signature at the bottom of the visible document. It was signed Sydney Caldwell. I have watched my daughter write her name since she was 5 years old. I know the loop of her S and the sharp angle of her Y. The signature on that paper was shaky, hesitant, and fundamentally wrong. It did not look like my daughter's hand. I stared at the paper, and the coldness in my chest turned into something else. Something sharp and familiar. Mum Sydney called from the living room. Are you leaving? Yes. I called back. I am leaving. I walked out without looking back. They thought they had dismissed a useless old woman. But they forgot that before I was a mother, and before I was a widow, I was an auditor. And I had just found a discrepancy that was going to cost them everything. The drive back to my small rental unit felt less like a retreat and more like a tactical withdrawal. As the windshield wipers slapped against the glass, I found myself involuntarily auditing the last 20 years of my life. I did not just raise Sydney with love. I raised her with equity. I paid the tuition for a degree she never used. I co-signed the loan for her first townhouse when her credit score was too thin to stand on its own. When she decided she wanted to be an event planner, I wrote the check for her business license and her website domain. I was not just a mother. I was her angel investor, one who never asked for a return on investment until now. Last year, she brought Grant home. Grant was not a boyfriend. He was a consultant. He spoke in a language of buzzwords that made my teeth ache. He did not introduce friends. He introduced his network. He did not talk about a marriage. He talked about a partnership launch. The wedding is a project. Marianne. He had told me over a dinner I paid for. We have to think about the deliverables. I should have closed my checkbook then. Instead, I drained my supplemental retirement fund. I handed over nearly everything I had saved for my old age because Sydney had looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes and swore that I was only bridging the gap. The sponsors are covering the big-ticket items. Mum, she had said, you just need to stand as the guarantor for the deposits. It is practically symbolic. It was a symbolic gesture that ballooned into a $500,000 spectacle. The budget included a venue that looked like a European resort, a 12-piece live band, LED walls for video displays, drones for aerial videography, and something listed absurdly as a public relations crisis management package. I unlocked the door to my room and went straight to my suitcase. Buried beneath my sensible sweaters was a heavy blue metal file box. People tease me for keeping paper copies in a digital world, but paper does not suffer from server outages, and ink does not delete itself. I live by the numbers, and I trust physical evidence. I sat on the edge of the bed and flipped open the latch. The smell of cold paper wafted up. I began to lay out every contract, every vendor agreement, and every invoice I had received over the last 8 months. I pulled out the catering contract. I pulled out the lighting agreement. I pulled out the venue rental terms. as I lined them up on the bedspread. A pattern emerged that made my stomach turn. My name was not just on the guarantee line. I was listed as the primary authorized payer on addendums I did not remember discussing. A memory flashed back to me from 3 months ago. I had asked Grant about a specific deposit for the florist. Grant: "This amount seems high for a deposit." I had said, "Are you sure the sponsor funds are clearing?" He had laughed, a soft, dismissive sound, and patted my hand as if I were a confused child. "Marianne, please," he had said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Don't worry your head about the back-end logistics. The adults are resolving it with the vendors. You just enjoy the ride." The adults? I looked down at the paperwork spread across the quilt. The adults were not handling anything. The adults were using my credit rating as a shield. Then, my eyes landed on a printed email chain from the lead wedding planner. It was stapled to the back of the master schedule. I adjusted my glasses, reading the fine print that usually goes ignored. The email outlined the final protocols for the event. Subject: Final Authorization Hierarchy. Primary contact for final approvals: Grant Halford. Financial liability holder: Marianne Caldwell. My breath hitched. He had the power to say yes, but I had the obligation to pay. But then, my finger traced down to the bottom of the page, to a section labeled Security and Emergency Protocols. Emergency Cancellation Code. Caldwell 58. I stared at the code. It was my last name, followed by the year of my birth. It was the master kill switch for the entire event, a code intended to be used by the client in case of a disaster, like a hurricane or a death in the family. Caldwell 58, I whispered to the empty room. Grant had set himself up as the captain of the ship, giving orders and steering the course. But in their arrogance, or perhaps their laziness, they had assigned the self-destruct button to the one person they deemed unimportant. They thought I was just an ATM with a pulse. They forgot that I was also the one person who knew how to close an account. I reached for my phone. It was late, but the bank's automated system would be listening. And tomorrow, the important people were going to find out exactly what happens when the unimportant woman stops writing checks. I did not wait for the sun to fully rise before I picked up the phone. At 7:15 in the morning, I dialed the priority service line for the bank, where I held the joint wedding escrow account with Sydney. I did not call as a mother. I called as the primary account holder. "I am seeing some activity I did not authorize," I told the representative, my voice clipped and efficient. "I need a breakdown of all external linking attempts in the last 48 hours. The voice on the other end was polite but distant. "Ma'am, I see 3 small microtransactions, 2 cents, 5 cents, and 4 cents. These are standard test deposits to verify an external routing number for large wire transfers." "Test deposits," I repeated, writing the amounts down on a notepad. "Who initiated them? The request came through the secondary user profile." The agent replied, "Sydney Caldwell." I hung up and drove straight to the branch. I did not want to hear it. I wanted to see it. 10 minutes later, I sat in a cubicle with a junior banker who looked terrified of my silence. I made him print the pending transaction queue. There it was, bold and undeniable. A wire transfer for $180,000 was scheduled to execute at exactly 8:30 in the evening tonight. I looked at the time on the receipt. 8:30. That would be right in the middle of the rehearsal dinner speeches. I walked back to my car and pulled out the venue contract from my blue file box. I flipped to page 14, paragraph B. I knew what it said. but I needed to read the ink to be sure. Upon receipt of final payment, all funds convert to non-refundable status immediately. Cancellation after this point yields zero restitution. Once that money left the account, it was gone. My next call was to the audio-visual vendor. I needed to know what exactly I was paying for, with the rush fees listed on the invoice. Oh, Mrs. Caldwell. The technician answered, sounding cheerful. We are all set. Grant approved the final cut of the video last night. It is queued for the big screens. Video, I asked. What video? The love story montage, he said. I can send you the preview link if you want to check the sound levels. He texted me a link. I sat in the parking lot of the bank and tapped the screen. The video began with slow-motion footage of Sydney and Grant walking on a beach. But the music was not romantic. It was driving, rhythmic, almost corporate. Then the voiceover started. It wasn't Sydney, and it wasn't Grant. It was a professional narrator, partnership, vision, a future built on solid foundations. The words were cold. The script didn't sound like wedding vows. It sounded like a merger announcement. And then, at the very end, just before the screen faded to black, a logo flashed briefly in the corner, powered by Northridge Capital Solutions. I froze. This wasn't a wedding video. This was a pitch deck. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The expensive dinner, the exclusive guest list, the ban on anyone not considered important. It was all a facade. Grant wasn't marrying my daughter. He was launching a shell company, and he was using her wedding as the launch party to trap investors. The VIPs weren't friends. They were targets. I started the engine and drove to the law office of an old family friend, Teresa McKinnon. She was a divorce lawyer who had seen the worst of human nature, and her office smelled of old books and stale coffee. I laid the papers out on her mahogany desk, the wire instructions, the venue contract, and the printout of the test transfers. Teresa, I said, leaning forward. I am the authorized payer. My name is on the money. Do I have the legal right to stop this payment and void the contracts Teresa put on her reading glasses? She studied the documents for a long time, her face unreadable. She traced the signature on the wire instruction sheet, the one that looked like Sydney's name, written by a stranger's hand. Marianne, she said slowly, looking up at me over the rim of her glasses. You have the right to stop the payment, but you need to understand what you are looking at. I am looking at financial irresponsibility. I said. No, Teresa replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. If this signature is not Sydney's, and if Grant uses this document to move 6 figures of your money into a business account without your explicit consent, this is not just a contract dispute. She tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. This is wire fraud, Teresa said. If that money moves tonight, the wedding is technically a crime scene. I texted Sydney and asked her to meet me at O'Malley's, the dusty diner where we used to have breakfast every Sunday before she grew up and moved away. I told her it was urgent. I told her I would not take no for an answer. She arrived 20 minutes late. She did not slide into the booth. She perched on the edge of the vinyl seat as if she were afraid of catching a disease from the upholstery. Her phone was in her hand, the screen glowing against her palm. Mom, I really do not have time for this, Sydney said, her eyes darting to the notification light blinking on her device. Grant has the team running a full sound check, and I need to approve the table settings within the hour. Put the phone down. Sydney, I said softly. She sighed, a sharp exhalation of annoyance, and placed the phone face down. Fine. What is it? Is it about the seating chart? Because Grant said, it is not about the seating chart. I interrupted. I pulled the photo I had taken of the wire instructions out of my purse and slid it across the sticky table. I found this in your kitchen. It is an instruction to wire $180,000 to Northridge Capital Solutions. The signature at the bottom says it is yours. Sydney glanced at the paper, then looked away, fixing her gaze on the salt shaker. So she asked defensively, Grant handles the vendor payments? He said it is for the infrastructure, the signature. Sydney. I pressed, keeping my voice low. Look at the loop on the S. Look at the pressure on the pen. You did not sign this. She shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you are being paranoid. Grant has my permission to sign for me on administrative things. We are partners. Partners share information, I said. They do not empty their partner's mother's bank account into a shell company. I unlocked my phone and played the video clip the technician had sent me. The corporate voiceover boomed through the small speaker partnership. Vision. Powered by Northridge Capital Solutions. Sydney watched the screen. For a second, the mask slipped. Her mouth opened slightly, and confusion clouded her eyes. She looked young again, and scared. That is not... She started, then stopped. She swallowed hard, rebuilding her defenses in real time. That is just a draft. The editing team probably used a template. It does not mean anything. It means your wedding is a sales pitch, I said. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold. Sydney, look at me. Did you knowingly sign a command to transfer $180,000 tonight at 8:30? Sydney pulled her hand away. She looked at the window, then at her phone, then at her lap. She stammered, her voice trembling. I do not remember. There were so many papers last night. Grant said just sign the stack and he would sort them. I might have. Before I could answer, a shadow fell over the table. There you are, a smooth baritone voice said. I looked up. Grant was standing there. He was wearing a casual polo shirt that looked freshly pressed, and his smile was tight, showing too many teeth. He did not look surprised to see us. He looked like a man who had been tracking a package and had finally located it. Grant, Sydney said, her voice jumping an octave. Mom wanted to ask about the video. Grant placed a hand on Sydney's shoulder. His fingers dug in slightly, a possessive grip disguised as affection. Mom, Grant said, nodding to me. I apologize if Sydney is seeming a bit scattered. The pressure of the big day gets to everyone. You are adding to her stress. I am asking about my money. Grant, I said, not breaking eye contact, and about why my daughter's signature is being forged on legal documents. Grant laughed, a short, dismissive sound. He pulled Sydney up from the booth. She went willingly, her body language collapsing into his. It is adorable how much you worry. Marianne, he said. But you are confused. We are building a future. You are just writing checks. Leave the business to us. If it is my money standing as the guarantee, I said, standing up to meet his gaze, then I have the right to know where it goes, and I have the right to stop it. Grant's smile vanished. His face went blank and hard. He leaned in close, so only I could hear. You want to feel important, he whispered. Then do not destroy your daughter's happiness because you are feeling left out. If you cannot support the vision, then do not show up tonight. We do not need negative energy in the room. He turned and steered Sydney toward the door. Come on, babe. The investors are landing in an hour. As they walked away, Sydney reached up to scratch her wrist. Her sleeve pulled back, and I saw it. There was a red, irritated ring around her skin, the kind left by a tight plastic band. It wasn't a bracelet. It was an RFID tag, the cheap, trackable kind they put on event staff and temporary contractors to monitor their movement through a venue. I sat back down in the booth, my heart hammering against my ribs. He wasn't just marrying her, he was managing her. My daughter was not the bride in this production. She was just another asset he was tracking on a dashboard. And tonight, he was planning to liquidate everything. Revenge is rarely a loud affair. In the movies, it involves screaming matches and thrown wine glasses. But in my world, the world of audits and compliance, revenge is quiet. It is the sound of a pen scratching across paper, the click of a mouse, and the rigid application of contract law. I did not want to make a scene. I wanted to build a cage. My plan had 3 layers. First, I had to stop the money. Second, I had to freeze the assets. And third, I had to extract my daughter before the walls closed in. I walked back into the bank branch at 10 o'clock in the morning. The junior banker looked up, surprised to see me again so soon. I sat down and placed my driver's license on his desk. I am invoking my right as the joint account holder, I said, my voice steady. I want to place a stop payment order on the pending wire transfer for $180,000. Furthermore, I want to flag the account for suspicious activity. No changes to the authorized user list can be made without physical presence and 2 forms of government identification. The banker typed rapidly. Done. The wire is cancelled. The funds are frozen pending review. Step 1 was complete. Now for the suffocating part. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and pulled out the contact list for the vendors. I started with the venue, then moved to the catering company, the audio-visual team, the private security firm, and finally, the transportation service. For each call, I kept the conversation short and lethal. This is Marianne Caldwell, the financial guarantor for the Halford Caldwell event. I said to the venue manager, I am invoking the emergency cancellation code detailed in Clause 4, Section B. The code is Caldwell 58. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of typing. I see the code. Mrs. Caldwell, the manager said, his tone shifting from polite to professional. Are you cancelling the event? No, I replied. I am placing the event on hold for verification status. Do not allow any equipment load-in. Do not unlock the ballroom doors. Do not clear the security checkpoints until you hear from me personally. I did not want to cancel the wedding outright. If I cancelled, Grant could spin a story that I was a bitter, jealous mother destroying her daughter's big day. I needed to pause time. I needed to make the machinery stop working just long enough for Grant to panic. When a machine stops, the operator has to come out of the booth to fix it, and that is when you see who they really are. Next, I called Teresa, per her instructions. I drafted a formal email titled Notice of Disputed Authorization. I sent it to every vendor, copying Grant and Sydney. The email stated clearly that the signature on the financial release was contested and that any service provided based on that signature would be considered unauthorized and unpaid. Now we wait. Teresa told me over the phone, if he tries to override you, he has to produce a new signature. If he fakes it again, he goes to jail. If he forces Sydney to sign under duress, we have witnesses. while the silence began to spread through the vendor network. I made one final request to the venue. I asked for the security list for the backstage passes. When the email arrived, I cross-referenced it with the wire instruction sheet I had photographed. It was a perfect match. The people listed as investor guests were the same names attached to the email chain regarding the wire transfer. They weren't family. They weren't friends. They were the wallets Grant intended to open. I needed one final nail in the coffin. I called Calvin Rhodes, an old colleague who now worked in forensic accounting for large-scale corporate events. I gave him the name of the company receiving the money, Northridge Capital Solutions. "It sounds legitimate," Calvin said, the clicking of his keyboard audible in the background. "But let me dig into the state registry filings. Give me 20 minutes. I sat in the silence of my car, watching the rain streak the window. My phone remained silent. The vendors were holding the line. The money was staying in the bank. The trap was set. 18 minutes later, my phone pinged. It was a text from Calvin. "Marianne, look at this. Northridge is a shell. No physical office, just a mailbox in Delaware. But look at the registered agent's history." He sent an image file. It was a screenshot from a business seminar held in Florida 2 years ago. The speaker on the stage was wearing a sharp suit and a charming smile, gesturing to a screen that promised high returns on event-based investments. The caption identified him as Greg Harrelson, visionary entrepreneur. But I knew that face. I knew that smile. It was the same man who had told me last night that only important people were allowed inside. Grant wasn't just a bad fiancé. He was a script that had been run before. He was running the same con in different states, changing his name but keeping the method. He finds a girl, plans a lavish wedding to create an illusion of wealth, invites investors to the rehearsal dinner, and then vanishes with the wire transfers before the cake is cut. I stared at the photo, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles turned white. "Got you," I whispered. By 5 o'clock that evening, my phone ceased to be a communication device and became a detonator. The silence I had enjoyed in the bank parking lot shattered as the sun began to dip below the horizon. First, it was the wedding planner, Mrs. Caldwell. "The lighting crew is refusing to unload the truck," she said, her voice pitched high with professional panic. "They say there is a flag on the account. We have 2 hours until doors open. You need to lift the hold. I am verifying the contracts," I said calmly. "Tell them to wait." Next, the venue manager called, then the catering head. I let those calls go to voicemail. I was not interested in speaking to the collateral damage. I was waiting for the target. Then, Sydney called. I answered on the first ring. "Mom." She was screaming, not in anger, but in sheer, unadulterated terror. "Mom, what are you doing?" "The venue manager says the ballroom is locked. They are threatening to walk away. If the payment does not clear by 8 o'clock, they cancel everything." "Sydney, listen to me," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "No, you listen." She sobbed. "Grant is freaking out. He says you are ruining my life on purpose." "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need to know the truth," I said. "Sydney, do you know where the money is going tonight? Do you actually know?" There was a silence on the line, broken only by her ragged breathing. It is for the vendors," she stammered. "Grant said it was a bundled payment, a tax adjustment thing to save money." "A tax adjustment," I repeated. "Sydney, vendors do not get paid to a shell company in Delaware. You are being lied to." "Stop it," she cried. Just fix it. The line went dead. She had hung up, or someone had hung up for her. 30 seconds later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed Grant Halford. I took a deep breath and pressed answer. "You spiteful old woman." Grant spat. The charm was gone. The corporate buzzwords were gone. This was the voice of a man watching his payday evaporate. "You are in breach of contract. Do you hear me? I will sue you for every penny you have. I will bury you in legal fees until you are living in your car. Go ahead," I said. "I have the wire instruction sheet. Grant. I have the forgery. I have the forensic analysis of the handwriting. If you want to go to court, we can go. But I suspect the police will want to talk to you about identity theft first." The line went quiet. I could hear the background noise, people talking, music playing faintly. He was calculating. "Marianne," he said, his voice suddenly dropping into that smooth, sickening purr he used to charm investors. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I am under a lot of stress. Sydney is over there crying her eyes out. You do not want to be the reason your daughter is heartbroken. Do you just release the funds? We can discuss the structure. Tomorrow. I am not releasing a dime," I said. "She thinks you are jealous," Grant said, his voice hardening again, the manipulation twisting the knife. "She thinks you are doing this because you are not in the spotlight. Do not prove her right." I hung up. I did not need to hear any more. I drove to the hotel where the rehearsal dinner was being held. It was a grand, sprawling resort with a long driveway lined with palm trees. I did not pull up to the valet. Instead, I parked in the shadows of the overflow lot, near the service entrance. I sat in the dark cabin of my car and watched. Guests were arriving, but they did not look like wedding guests. There were no gift bags. There were no children. The men were wearing business suits, not tuxedos. The women wore cocktail dresses that looked more appropriate for a boardroom mixer than a family celebration. As they walked toward the ballroom entrance, I saw the flash of plastic around their necks. They were wearing lanyards. I squinted through the windshield. The lanyards were color-coded. Some were blue, some were silver, and a select few were gold. This was not a rehearsal dinner. This was a segmentation strategy. I rolled down my window as a group of staff members walked by on their cigarette break. They were wearing the venue uniform, leaning against the wall just a few feet from my car. "Man, this guy is intense," one of the servers said, lighting a cigarette. "He has been screaming about the AV setup for an hour." "It is not a wedding." "Dude," the other one replied, exhaling smoke. "I worked a gig for this group in Florida last year. It is a buy-in event. See those gold badges? Those are the whales." "So what is the ceremony tomorrow?" the first one asked. The second server laughed. "Theatre. If the platinum group signs the contracts tonight, tomorrow is just stage work to keep them happy. Once the money clears, the groom vanishes. He always does." I rolled up the window, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. It was exactly as I had feared. The wedding was just a costume. My daughter was not a bride, she was the bait. And Grant was about to close the deal, assuming he could bully me into unlocking the bank vault. But he had made a fatal error. He thought he was dealing with a mother who could be shamed into submission. He forgot he was dealing with an auditor who had just found the discrepancy that would shut down the entire operation. I stepped out of the shadows of the parking lot and walked into the service corridor of the hotel. I was not there to cause a scene. I was there to present evidence. I intercepted the lead wedding planner. a woman named Jessica, who looked like she was about to hyperventilate, right outside the kitchen doors. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, stopping short. "You are not allowed back here. Security has been instructed to—" "The security team works for a shell company," I cut in, my voice level and hard. "And if you continue to take orders from Grant Halford, you are going to be listed as a co-conspirator in a federal fraud investigation." I held up the document I had prepared with Teresa. It was a formal notice of disputed authorization. "This is a legal notification that the financial guarantor has flagged the primary funding source as compromised," I said, thrusting the paper into her hands. "If you execute any contracts tonight based on the signature of Sidney Caldwell, you are facilitating a crime. Do you want to lose your license over a wedding that is not even real?" Jessica looked at the paper. Her face went pale, the color draining away under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. I did not know." She stammered. "He told me the funds were secured. He said you were just difficult." "I am difficult." I agreed. "I am also right. Now, I can keep your name out of the police report if you help me. I need the communication logs. I need to know exactly what he asked you to do." Jessica swallowed hard and pulled out her tablet. Her hands were shaking. "He kept changing the run of show," she whispered, scrolling through emails. "He called it a pivot. He asked me to upload a new video file to the main LED wall for the ceremony entrance. He called it a pitch deck. I thought it was a joke. But he was serious. He said the vows needed to be optimized for the audience. And the security, I asked, why are there guards at the doors who aren't wearing hotel uniforms? "He brought them in," Jessica said. "He said the venue security was insufficient for his high net worth guests. He hired a firm called NCS Protection." I asked her for the address on the NCS Protection invoice. She showed me the screen. It was a P.O. box in Delaware. The same box number, the same street, and the same suite number as Northridge Capital Solutions. Grant was not just stealing the money, he was paying himself to guard the theft. I stepped away and called Teresa immediately. "He has brought in his own enforcers," I told her. "They are masquerading as private security. You need to file a report now." "Marianne," Teresa said, her voice sharp. "Do not wait. Call the non-emergency line and file a report for suspicion of wire fraud and identity theft. Get a case number. If things go wrong tomorrow, we need proof that you tried to stop it legally." I did exactly that. I sat on a bench in the hotel lobby, hidden behind a large potted palm, and gave my statement to the dispatch officer. I gave them the dates, the amounts, and the proof of the stopped wire transfer. I made sure to emphasize that this was an active situation. I was building the paper trail that would serve as my shield and Grant's cage. Upstairs, the trap was tightening around my daughter. I tried to call Sydney again, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Jessica had told me that Grant had confiscated all personal devices from the bridal party for security reasons. He had sent Sydney to her room to rest for the big day, effectively placing her in solitary confinement so she could not hear the truth. I was about to stand up and march to the elevators when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. "If you interfere again, the bride will be humiliated in front of 400 people tomorrow. We control the narrative." Below the text was a photo. It was a picture of Sydney standing in front of a mirror in her wedding dress, taken from a high angle, clearly from a hidden camera in the changing room. She looked beautiful. but she also looked like a target seen through a scope. They were watching her. They were watching me. And they were threatening to destroy her reputation if I did not let them steal her future. I stared at the image, and for the first time that night, the auditor in me stepped back, and the mother stepped forward. They thought this threat would make me back down. They were wrong. It only meant I had to move faster. The threat against my daughter shifted something inside me. For the last 24 hours, I had been operating as an auditor, looking for discrepancies and broken clauses, but staring at that stolen image of Sydney in her dress, the cold logic of the ledger vanished. I was no longer worried about the money. I was terrified of the silence that comes after a door locks from the outside. I was not going to lose her twice, first to her father's death, and now to a man who saw her as nothing more than collateral. I knew I could not storm the bridal suite. Grant had his private security stationed like prison guards. I needed an accomplice on the inside. I texted Janelle Price, Sydney's maid of honor and best friend since the 3rd grade. Janelle, I need you to get Sydney to the service entrance in 10 minutes. Tell anyone who asks that you need to do a final check on the bouquet in natural light. Do not let Grant see you. Please. This is life or death. I waited in my car with the engine running, the air conditioning blasting to hide the sound of my own ragged breathing. 10 minutes later, the heavy steel door creaked open. Janelle poked her head out, looking terrified, and pulled Sydney along behind her. Sydney looked exhausted. Her hair was half-pinned, her face pale without makeup. She slid into the passenger seat of my sedan, bringing the smell of expensive hairspray and fear with her. Mom. Seriously, Sydney said, her voice shaking. Grant is going to freak out if he finds out I left the floor. He has a schedule, he said. Forget what Grant said. I interrupted. I locked the car doors. The sound of the latch clicking made her jump. I reached into the back seat and grabbed the file. I did not soften the blow. I laid the evidence on her lap, the forged wire instruction sheet, the forensic analysis of the signature, and the list of guests categorized by their net worth. Look at it. Sydney, I said. Really look at it. She stared at the papers. Her hands began to tremble, rattling the stiff paper. She traced the loops of the signature that wasn't hers. She read the names on the platinum investor list, names she thought were Grant's distant cousins or college mentors. I don't understand, she whispered. You do understand, I said, my voice hard but not angry. You have been sensing it for months. The secret phone calls, the way he snaps at you when you ask about the budget, the way this wedding feels less like a celebration and more like a production launch. Sydney looked up at me, and her eyes were swimming with tears. The denial finally broke. He is in debt. Mom, she choked out. He owes so much money. He told me. He told me that if we pull off this wedding, the investors will sign, and we will be free. He said the wedding is the closer. He is selling shares in a ghost company. Sydney, I said. And you are the marketing campaign. He is using your face and my money to bait the trap. But if I leave... She hyperventilated, clutching her chest. The scandal. The guests are already flying in. Everyone is watching. I can't just stop. The scandal, I asked. Sydney. The scandal is not cancelling a party. The scandal is waking up next to a felon who drained your mother's bank account and legally bound you to his debts. That is the scandal that never washes off. I reached over and grabbed her hand, squeezing it tight enough to hurt. I am giving you a choice right now. You can walk back in there, put on that dress, and be his prop. Or you can stay in this car. If you stay, I will handle the venue. I will handle the lawsuits. I will handle the gossip. You do not have to say a word. I will be the villain, so you can be free. Sydney looked at the dashboard, then back at the hotel. She looked at the file on her lap. He made me send it, she said softly. What I asked. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, ruining the expensive primer on her cheeks. The text. She sobbed. The one about only important people being allowed. I didn't want to send it. He stood over me and watched me type it. He said, if you came to the rehearsal, you would ask too many questions about the contracts. He needed you gone. Mom. He made me push you away because he knew you were the only one who would check the math. I felt my heart break and heal all in the same second. My daughter hadn't rejected me. She had been used as a weapon against me because I was the only threat Grant truly feared. Okay, I said, putting the car in gear. That is all I needed to hear. The chaos started within minutes of us pulling into the back lot, but it was not the joyous chaos of a wedding day. It was the frantic, jagged panic of a production falling apart. My phone began to vibrate with alerts from the venue management, but I ignored them. I needed to establish a perimeter. Inside the hotel, Grant had realized his asset was missing. According to the texts, Janelle was sneaking to me from a bathroom stall. He had gone nuclear. He had ordered his private security team to lock the exits to the bridal wing and was physically confiscating the cell phones of the bridesmaids, claiming it was a high-level security protocol to prevent leaks. It was the action of a man who knew the walls were closing in. I called Teresa immediately. We are on the premises, I told her, my voice calm over the sound of distant sirens. Grant has detained the bridal party and confiscated their communication devices. I need you to call the venue management and remind them that unlawful imprisonment is a felony. Get the hotel security to override his hired goons. I am on it, Teresa replied. Do not engage him physically. Marianne. Let the institution do the work. I walked Sydney toward the side entrance, keeping my body between her and the building. Inside, the atmosphere was toxic. I saw Jessica, the planner, standing near the control booth for the ballroom. She saw me, gave a barely perceptible nod, and typed a command into her tablet. Suddenly, the massive LED screens inside the ballroom, which had been looping the corporate-style teaser video, went black. The pitch deck was dead. Grant's presentation was cut. I checked my feed. The damage was already bleeding out into the digital world. Several of the guests, the actual friends, not the investors, had started posting confused updates. One influencer cousin posted a story of the security guards blocking the hallway with the caption, "Why does this feel like a hostage situation?" Grant found us near the service elevator. He looked unraveled. His tie was loosened, his hair wild, and his eyes were darting around like a trapped animal. "You," he snarled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are poisoning her. Sydney, get away from her. She is jealous. She is insane. She wants to ruin your moment because she is bitter." Sydney shrank back against the wall, trembling. She looked at him, then at me. She was standing in the crossfire of two realities, the man she thought she loved and the mother who had the receipts. "I have the forgery. Grant," I said, stepping forward, "and I have the bank records. The moment is already over." "It is not over," Grant screamed, his voice cracking. "Sydney, listen to me. We can fix this. Just sign the override. Just tell the bank it was a mistake. If we do not close the round tonight, I mean, if we do not pay the vendors, everything is gone." He slipped. He said close the round. Sydney looked at him, tears streaming down her face. She was vibrating with fear. The fear of public humiliation. The fear of the 400 people waiting in the ballroom. The fear of the unknown. I gripped her shoulders. I did not coddle her. I did not tell her it would be okay. I told her the only thing that mattered. "Sydney, look at me," I said. "You have to choose right now. Do you want the truth? Or do you want the stage? You cannot have both." Grant lunged forward, but he was stopped by a heavy hand on his shoulder. A man in a sharp grey suit, one of the men wearing a gold lanyard from the Platinum Investor list, had stepped out of the shadows. "Grant," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. "Why are the screens dark? We have a schedule. My partners are waiting for the demonstration." Grant froze. He looked from the investor to me, terror washing over his face. He was not afraid of losing a bride. He was afraid of defaulting on a shark. It is a technical glitch," Grant stammered, sweating profusely. "Just give me 5 minutes." My phone rang. It was the fraud department of my bank, Mrs. Caldwell. The agent said urgently, "We just detected an attempt to reactivate the scheduled wire transfer for $180,000. The user provided your social security number and answered 2 security questions correctly." "I did not authorize that," I said, staring at Grant. "We traced the IP address." "Ma'am?" The agent continued. "The login attempt originated from a device connected to the hotel Wi-Fi network, where you are currently located. The device name is Grant's MacBook Pro." I lowered the phone and looked at the man who had almost become my son-in-law. He wasn't just a liar. He was actively trying to rob me while standing 3 feet away, using the confusion to make one last desperate grab for the cash. He just tried to override the wire. I announced, loud enough for the investor and Sydney to hear. From inside this building, the investor's face went cold. Sydney stopped crying, and the air in the hallway turned from tense to explosive. The arrival of the venue management, flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the local precinct, changed the atmosphere in the hallway instantly. It was the difference between a chaotic argument and a legal intervention. I stood back and watched as the venue manager, holding the contract I had flagged, approached the private security guards Grant had hired. "You have no jurisdiction on this property," the manager stated, his voice booming. "Your contract is with an unauthorized third party. Leave the premises immediately, or you will be arrested for trespassing." The hired muscle looked at the police officers, then at Grant, and made the smart business decision. They walked away. Grant was left standing alone, his tie crooked, his chest heaving. He looked at me with pure hatred, but I just held up the file in my hand. Sydney took a deep breath. She did not walk into the ballroom to face the 400 guests and the investors. She signaled for the bridal party and the immediate family to gather in the small holding room. She looked small in her white dress, but her voice did not shake. "The wedding is paused indefinitely," Sydney said, looking at the floor and then lifting her chin to look at Grant. "There are significant legal issues regarding the funding and the contracts. I will not be proceeding." "You are making a mistake," Grant shouted, lunging toward her. "Sydney, baby, do not listen to her. It is just a cash flow timing issue. He tried to grab a microphone that was sitting on the tech table, intending to override her and speak to the room, to spin the narrative one last time. But Jessica, the planner, was faster. She cut the audio feed. The microphone went dead in his hand, behind him. The LED screens remained pitch black. The stage he had built to sell his vision had been powered down. I stepped forward and placed the documents on the table. It was time for the final audit. It is not a timing issue. Grant, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. It is fraud. Here is the forensic analysis of the signature you forged on the wire transfer instructions. Here is the log from the bank, showing an attempt to override the security block from your personal laptop, using the hotel Wi-Fi 10 minutes ago. And here is the email chain where you instructed the video team to insert the pitch deck into the wedding vows. The man in the grey suit, the platinum investor, walked over to the table. He picked up the papers, read the summary, and looked at Grant with cold, dead eyes. You told us you had liquid capital, the investor said. You told us the event was fully funded by your private equity gains. I do, Grant stammered, backing away. It is just tied up. If you sign the partnership agreement tonight, I can release. I am not signing anything, the investor said, dropping the paper. And neither is anyone else. He turned and walked out. As he left, the other men with gold lanyards followed him. They smelled the smoke of a burning scam, and they ran. Grant collapsed into a chair, putting his head in his hands. He started rambling, blaming the economy, blaming the banks, and finally, blaming me. You ruined it, he muttered. You spiteful witch. You ruined everything. I did not ruin it. I replied, I just audited it. The truth was laid bare for everyone to see. The $500,000 wedding did not exist. It never had. It was a house of cards built on small deposits, and the expectation that I would wire $180,000 tonight to cover the deficit. When I froze the money, the entire system crashed. The vanishing began almost immediately. The venue manager declared the contract void due to non-payment. The catering staff began packing up the food before it was even served. The florists returned to strip the roses from the archways. The shuttle buses that were supposed to transport guests were recalled. Within 2 hours, the ballroom was empty, dark, and silent. It was as if the wedding had never happened. We stood in the parking lot, the cool night air feeling like a blessing after the stifling heat of the hotel. Sydney was wearing sweatpants she had pulled on under her dress, holding her expensive heels in her hand. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, but clear for the first time in months. I am sorry, Mom, she whispered. I am so sorry. I almost lost you. I almost lost myself. You didn't, I said, wrapping my coat around her shoulders. You are safe. We can fix the credit score. We can fix the debt. We can fix all of it. I do not want any money, she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. I just want to start over, and I promise, I will never let anyone push you out again, and I will never let anyone sell you again. I replied. I opened the car door for her. We left Grant sitting on the curb, arguing with the police about his unpaid hotel bill. He had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. He thought he could lock me out because I wasn't important. He forgot that the person holding the keys to the exit is the most important person in the room. Thanks so much for listening to this story. Drop a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Marianne handled this. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to Nora Revenge Stories, like the video, and smash that hype button to help get this story out to more people.